Well, good morning, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Peter Frank, and I will be leading our webinar today. Our topic today is Leave No One Behind, using your church management software, your CHMS, to minister to inactive members. Again, my name is Peter Frank. I am the Senior Marketing Manager at Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been with our group here for going on, I think it's now going to be 6 or 7 years, 6 years, I believe, by the end of the summer. I've been with our organization for about 11 years now. We are part of Concordia Publishing House. In fact, I'll show that on the next slide, so I won't jump too far ahead. My contact information is on the screen. If you'd like to reach out to me, feel free to email me. That's probably the best way to reach me. My phone number is there as well. I'm not usually sitting in my office as much as I will be during this presentation, but that phone number there, the 1408 number, goes right to my phone. And I always like to point that out to give me one last check to make sure that it's forwarding to voicemail. So don't try calling me right now, because you'll get my voicemail while I'm live. But I always appreciate talking to people who are in the church, finding out how we here at Concordia Technology Solutions can help you in any way possible. Our goal is to help you leverage technology in your ministry, and one of the ways we do that is through the products that we provide. But another way we do that is through training, and so that's what we're going to be kind of doing today. Is a mixture of both product and training. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But let me go ahead and switch to Concordia Technology Solutions and tell you a little bit about us. We are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House, and we've been providing software solutions for churches since 1984. Now, the publishing house has been around since 1869, and you heard that right, that's 1869. We're about to celebrate our 150th anniversary, which is very exciting. It's a joyous occasion here as we look at how the Lord has blessed us for almost 150 years of sharing his gospel. Now, as times have changed, certainly the means by which we do that has changed. And so in the mid-80s, when software was starting to become a thing for churches, that was one more way that we could help you help you share the gospel by providing resources that support the activities in the church. So that's what we're here for. CTS has been around as CTS by name for going around 14, 15 years. Before, we were always named based off of our product. You may have heard of Shepherd Staff. That's been a core product of ours for many years, and as we expanded the line, we went with a different naming convention. So today I'm going to be focusing our attention on one of our products, Church360 Members. Now, Church360 Members is church management software, and we're using it today because it's great to have that visual. But if you already have a solution, or you are using something like Shepherd Staff, one of our others, don't worry, there's going to be enough information in here today that is valuable that it's not all about Church360 Members. Now, I am a marketer. I tend to sell things. That's my job. So sometimes I'll get into that. I always try really hard to make this be more about the content than about the product. But we're going to talk about the product for a few minutes just to give you a little bit of a background, because we'll often get questions about it if I don't. So Church360 Members is part of the Church360 suite. We call it Complete Church Management, because included in that suite of products is Church360 Ledger and Church360 Unite. And I may mention those a couple times here. We're not going to be getting into the discussion about those. We have plenty of resources available for you to learn more about those. But Church360 Ledger is our church finance software for your general ledger, thus the name. And then Church360 Unite is our church website builder that allows you to unite your online communications into one platform. So that's about all I'll do for those. Now, Church360 Members is church management software, also referred to as CHMS. Now, like any core church management software, it allows you to manage your people, your attendance, and your offering information all in one spot. And that's going to come up in our first point here as being the core data that you need to follow up with inactive members. So, like I said, most church management softwares will have those three things. So the principles that we teach here today will apply to whatever solution you have. All right, so let me talk a little bit about why we have this topic today. And it really stems back to my work at my church. And saying it like that makes it sound like it's all about me. I have the honor of serving on our board of elders at my congregation and have for several years. Now, a few years ago, we encountered a situation where one of our members had not been attending for a while. She is an elderly member. She was faithful for years and years, and as her health decreased, her mobility decreased, and she was unable to attend worship regularly. Then one day during the middle of the week, there was a funeral of another long-term member, and this member who had been inactive for a while came and stopped by the church office. Her daughter had brought her to the funeral, and she asked if someone could please follow up with her for a communion visit because she hadn't communed in months. And so the call went out to the elders, and I took it, and so I learned some of this information after I met with her. And it just made me feel so ashamed that we had not provided that care. She had clearly desired it, was too afraid to ask. That was what she had said to me. She said, I didn't want to trouble the pastor. He's got more than enough things to do than to hear from me. And that really struck me, is that it was a person who wanted to be an active part of the congregation, who could not physically, and because she didn't raise her hand and say, hey, look at me, please serve me, she wasn't being served. And that's nothing against our pastor. It's a very large congregation for a single pastor, and there's no way that any one person could keep up on it. And that's part of the problem, is that we didn't have systems in place to provide support for the pastor to care for these inactive members. Now, as we talk about inactive members, we know that not every inactive member is like this lady from my congregation, that where they desire care and are not getting it. We know that in most of the cases, the people that we label as inactive members have fallen away from the church, whether fallen out of the habit or intentionally are keeping themselves from the church because of some disagreement. Whatever goes into that action of becoming inactive, or maybe it's the inaction of becoming inactive, there's always a unique situation. And so we don't know that until we talk with the person. And that's really what today is about, is figuring out how to properly care for these individual situations, these unique situations, without blanketing them with a single approach, but having the tools to approach each situation individually. So let's talk about our goals for today. Our goals are first to outline a strategy for ministering to inactive members. And there's 5 points here. You may have already received the download that came with it. I know that as we communicated about this webinar, we shared a download in many ways. I'll share that link with you in a few moments, maybe closer to the end actually. But that'll kind of walk you through this strategy as well. So outline a strategy for ministering to inactive members. Show you how you can better leverage church management software for that. And I think that's one of the key things here is we'll be talking about Church360 Members, sure. But your church management software, whatever that is, can be leveraged to accomplish these goals of ministering to inactive members. And that's often not the first place people look. It's often a last resort of saying, well, maybe we can look in our database to see if we can figure something out. And I've heard it from many different people. I've heard it in my own congregation that church management software is meant for offerings. It's meant to provide the contribution statement to the givers, and that's it. And I've heard pastors say, well, that's what our secretary uses. I don't touch that. And I'm encouraging you to kind of break down that wall of saying this is the single purpose of church management software, and look at it from a ministry perspective of saying this can help me provide care for the members, spiritual care for these members. And we're going to focus just on inactives, but I'm sure as we go through this, you'll see how it can be applied to any member of the congregation too. So let's utilize this tool that we already have in place to better provide care for our members. So not only should it empower pastors and church staff, but you can also empower lay leaders in the congregation, whether you call them elders or deacons or shepherds. The names may vary, but there are people within your congregation who are not full-time church workers who assist in serving in the congregation in that pastoral care sense. They are not pastors themselves, but they support that ministry. And so church management software should not only be leveraged by the church secretary for those things we talked about, like offerings, but it should be leveraged by the pastor and other lay leaders who are eager to assist. So our outline for today is, first, we're going to review that 5-step strategy, and we'll kind of go through point by point throughout it. I'm going to show how Church360 Members or other church management software can be used. And most of what I have today will be part of the presentation. I'll have screenshots. I've got Church360 Members pulled up live so that we can get into that as needed. But for the most part, I want to talk about the concepts, because that's really what it comes down to today. And finally, we're going to spend some time for question and answers. So my goal is to do about 45 minutes of presentation, 15 for question and answers. I may push that presentation a little bit farther, but I do ask that as we talk here, as you listen to the strategies, please share your thoughts and comments. Put them in the chat. In fact, what I'd like to ask you to do first, before we take a few polls, is to just go ahead and put in your first name and where you're from. Where are you watching this from today? And put it in the chat. That'll allow you to see how to use the chat. It'll allow me to know that you're listening here today. So you should see it on there. It might be labeled as questions for you. I know, depending on whether you have downloaded the GoToWebinar or if you are using the web app for that, it'll tell you. So we've got Beth from Duluth, Minnesota. Thanks for joining us today, Beth. I appreciate you being here. We've got Josiah from Rancho Santa Margarita, California. So upper north and far west are here. Please, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. Tuning in with the West Coast. That means that it's pretty early for you right now. We've got Curtis up in Green Bay. Hi, Curtis. Good to see you again, or hear from you again. Thanks for joining us. It's been several months. Curtis was down here in St. Louis and stopped by for a visit, so it's always good to have him here too. Mark from Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. Ernest from King of Kings in San Antonio. So thanks for joining us. So we've got people from all over the country. I appreciate you being here today. So the next step, you've already introduced yourself and told me where you're from. We've got Chris from Illinois as well. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us. I grew up in Illinois, so just across the river from here in St. Louis. I grew up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, so I'm not sure where you're coming from, but thanks for being here. Now that you've told me a little bit about where you're watching, I've got a few quick questions for you that'll help me tailor the presentation. So the first question is to know what role in the church you have. I know we all wear many hats in the church. I'm just asking for your primary role. So are you a pastor, an administrator, a financial manager, called church worker, or maybe you're just a layperson like me? And go ahead and put that under other. This will help me kind of tailor the presentation for today. And as I present different scenarios, it'll help me know. And it looks like we've got at least the majority are in the pastor's role, although it is not, it is right now tracking at about 40%. All right, now administrator has kind of taken up, so we've got an even split of pastors and administrators as our number one, and then as we get down under called workers and others, that comes. So, all right, very good. Well, looks like we're mostly the way through. We're up to 44% pastors. Very good. Thank you for answering that. The next thing is to find out if you are already using Church360 Members at your congregation. Yes, no, or no, but planning too soon. This will help me understand how much I should get into Church360 Members versus focus solely on the contents. And it looks like we've got a good majority that are already actively using it. So that's good. I appreciate you being here. That allows me to focus this on more of a training, although we do have several who are not. So good. If I'm talking too much about the product, go ahead and put a note in the chat. Really, I want to focus on the concepts today. All right, very good. Well, let's move forward. So like I mentioned before, I have an outline of a process, 5 different steps. Let me switch over my screen here. And what I'm going to do is, you can see here, here's the page. I'm going to put this in the chat, this link here. And if you want to follow along, you can. Hopefully you can get that. So I just hit send to all. I hope that's coming across. If not, I'll be sure to include that in the emails, the follow-up emails today. But what this will do, it will allow you to download this reference sheet, and it's called Using Your CHMS to Minister to Inactive Members. There's 5 things on here that we've got. So, all right. I'm going to leave that right up there. We'll reference that in a little bit. I don't know if I just realized I've tailored this presentation a few times. I want to make sure, yeah, it looks like the last step I kind of changed around a little bit for the presentation today, because the last step today will be a little bit different, goes into a little bit more detail. So we'll get back into that. Sorry, as I saw that, I realized that I had made that tweak, but that's okay. It all still ties together. So the first step for today, which you will see, is tracking relevant data. And this is a core step of any process that you use within church management software. But I think it's probably not seen within the context of pastoral care like we're talking about today. And pastoral care in the sense of providing or supporting the pastoral care, even if you're not a pastor, that idea of ministering to others by sharing the gospel. So as we talk about church management software, it is a database. There's definitely data that goes in. We're going to talk about which relevant data to track. But keep in mind that all of this data points back to real people and to real life scenarios. And in a church setting, whether you have 20 members or 2,000 members, you're still dealing with people. The problem is that as people ourselves, as human beings, we can't possibly track all of this ourselves. Even in a small congregation where you may only have 20 people attending on a weekly basis, 20 lives to track and to understand where the peaks and the valleys are and when people may need more or less care is tough to do on your own. And that's why we have technology tools like church management software to help with that. But you're only as good as the data that you put in. And I think anybody who's ever worked with a database will understand that. We try to make church management software so that it's not so much of a database as really just a tool to use. But that's really what it comes down to. So let's talk about the core data. So first and foremost, what I always like to point to is the profile view of a person. And within Church360 Members, there's a lot of information all on one screen, and we try to put it there for you to see first and foremost. And I'll show a screen, I'll pull up our screen in just a moment to see that. But let's go through these things one by one. So the first thing you want to keep is contact information. Certainly you need to know the name. If you don't have the name, then you don't know who you're talking about. So name, but then contact information. And I think that often pastors forget that this is really what's great about church management software, is that this is the core place of where your contact information is, and your staff and your volunteers are keeping that up to date. So by having that contact information there readily and available, there's always that next step, whether it's to call or to email or to stop by a person's house and visit. You want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information, and that's from the time a person is new and keeping in touch with them as they change and helping them to know to update it. But then we get into family information, and that's a core part of anybody's personal life, is their family. Being able to see those connections outside of just the household is also key. I know within my congregation, there are a few families that have many different last names, but the family line is woven through all of them. And sometimes we have 3 or 4 branches of that family that have done that. I know in the congregation that I grew up in, it turns out that so many people were related to the Hartwig clan in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, they had different names that, you would never expect to be related, and people that as they were members of the congregation, they didn't even know who all they were related to. I think so-and-so is my second cousin by marriage. So having that family information in the profile view gives you a little bit more context to the situation, to an individual. And we, in Church360, the family is separate from the household, meaning you can have those connections without having the same address. All right, life events. These are key things like baptism and confirmation. But as you start looking at that family relationship, some of these life events are tied to the family. So it may be marriage with the couple, or the birth of children. So maybe the birth date or baptism date of a child is especially important to somebody. The death dates are a key part of it. When somebody passes away, understanding how that affects others in the family is key. And if you don't know those family relationships, you may not realize that, oh, well, that person who passed, their cousin goes here, and I just knew them as being good friends. I never realized that they were related. Demographic information certainly is important in knowing more about the person. It's probably a little bit more intuitive as you start thinking about things like their sex or their ethnicity. Doesn't come into pastoral care as much, but this is especially important as you're talking about new members or inactive members that you may have never seen before, and you start getting information, names that are unfamiliar to you. Now, the next one is helpful in a variety of different ways, and really the next two things can be used. I'll just talk about them together. There's tags and there's custom fields. And I think this is probably a good time to pull up the screen and show you the difference of tags and custom fields. So this is Church360 Members. If you're not familiar with it, I'm just going to click on a profile to go, and this almost identical to what I showed before. Dave Abbott is our typical presentation person, or our demo person. Not a real person. Certainly the pictures of a real person, but his name's not Dave. But we pulled this all together as a great example. So in addition to those standard things that everybody has, contact information, family, demographics, there's going to be information about people that is unique to them. And there's two types of information. There are things that you want to enter for everybody and things that you may only want to enter for some people. So let me give you a few examples. Occupation. So we have here that Dave is an engineer, and we also have employer. Now, we have created those, and they're in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. I'll move up a little bit so you can see me hovering over that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to try to, generally my taskbar doesn't show up as much as it is today, but we'll go ahead. All right. So let me maximize that. That'll be easier. So I don't want that to be a distraction. So we have created custom fields because not every church wants to track occupation or employer. In fact, in my congregation, we do employer or school so that kids have a place to put that in. You're not expecting them to do both. You're either a full-time student or a full-time employer, or maybe you're part-time, but we track that elsewhere. So we put that in there. That's a spot for everybody to have that field filled in. And what's great about that is you can start thinking about activities or placements of people related to their membership status that is more than just member or non-member. So I went to a presentation at Best Practices in Phoenix, where a church out there in California did a fantastic job of grouping their members by their activity. And so they had the first-time visitors to the new members, to the attending members, and then the leaders, the people who did more than just attend, but they also had a group for inactive. And the pastor and the staff there went through and identified those based on what they knew. Now, it was a smaller congregation, only about 140 people, so it was easier for them to do that. They had a small staff, but they still had a good understanding, and so they could put that in here. So we have what I call a journey map stage. Attending member. You would expect people to kind of grow along this path, and that's a great way to customize it for your church and put people there. Now, you also have the ability to do this with tags. What I like about custom fields is it's always in the same spot, and tags are really great for things that you may not put for everybody. So like speak Spanish, maybe attendance like men's Bible study, allergic to peanuts, we put that in there. Skills like plumbing or agriculture. Now that's great to be able to track members for activities and volunteer things, but what I like about that for ministering to inactives is that you can go and see some conversation starters. You can go and have a point of reference when you go and talk with this person, and maybe help build that relationship a little bit more, especially if they've been inactive for years. If you don't know anything about them, that's a tough conversation to have, because all they are is a name to you, maybe hopefully a phone number, email address. But when you start filling out this personal information, you've got that point of reference that you can kind of start off that conversation. And I know for me, I always enjoy finding out where people are from, how long have you lived in the area, what did you used to do, if you're retired, what was your profession before. All of that is great conversation starters. So that is the profile view. The last thing on here, and we're going to talk about this more a little later on, is notes. And you can add notes to a person, you can have notes to a household that flow down to all the individuals in the household. We'll look at that at a later step. All right, next type of information you want to track is attendance. Now, certainly worship attendance is a key thing. And I've heard many congregations who don't track worship attendance as by individuals. They do it by a head count. And so that's where we're going to go here next. First off, you can take attendance by a head count, by or like individual heads, by a total head count, or both. And I want to encourage you to take individual attendance as you are tracking and identifying inactive members. If you just track total worship attendance, you get a good understanding of the health of your congregation, but you don't get a good understanding of the health of your individual members. And I'm talking spiritual health here. Sometimes physical health may depend, may influence their worship patterns or worship attendance patterns, but really the spiritual health of your members, if you don't know whether or not they're coming, or if you rely only on what you have seen. Now, as a pastor, you may be seeing everybody who comes to worship, depending or regardless of service. But as a volunteer, as an elder like myself, or any number of other roles where the person is not at worship every single service, you cannot rely on your own understanding, your own memory. And tracking attendance, individual attendance, is not a foolproof system. A lot of people don't like to say that they're at worship, and so they don't fill out the attendance card or check the box in the book, fill out their name. But it's better than relying just on memory. So a combination of both who you remember seeing and who has indicated that they are there gives you that better understanding of who is, or more importantly, is not attending. Now, this could be, I think I'm jumping too far ahead. Yeah, let me go back. Sorry about that. I thought I had a bullet point. This could be worship attendance, but this could also be Bible study attendance or small group attendance, fellowship activities. You may see that there are people who are coming to all of the fellowship activities, but not to worship, and that points to their spiritual health. You may see that they're only attending worship and not attending fellowship activities, and that may point to their role within the church community, feeling that they are not part of the community but still want to attend worship. It gives you more information the more you have, and that's where this data really becomes important. Now, I know what you are thinking. If you haven't entered individual attendance, you're probably thinking that is a huge task. And I've heard that time and time again. And the reality is, yes, it is a huge task. What I recommend doing is utilizing volunteers to enter in attendance. You can give them access to this. This can be something that they can do to serve in the congregation that takes time away, or that doesn't take time from you in the church office if you're a pastor or an administrator. I know that's most of who we have here today. But this is a great opportunity for volunteers to step in and provide some helpful information that goes into providing spiritual care. So even if they're not the ones that are going out and visiting inactives, they are supporting that ministry by their time and their data entry. So I'll get off my soapbox for that. I think it's incredibly important to track attendance. I understand there are challenges, but I think it's worth tackling those challenges head on. Now, offerings is something that I don't ever hear anybody complain about, well, I don't want to track individual offerings, because there's some requirements there. Requirements by the government to be able to provide statements for people who have contributed donations to the congregation. That is most often what people think about when they think about church management software. The end result is that giving statement. And Church360 Members is no different. But as you look at offerings from a pastoral care perspective, changing and offering trends could signal changes at home. And they may be positive or they may be negative. An increase in offerings may be a new job, but a new job may be different work hours, may mean not being able to participate in the church community as much. There's, again, positive or negative changes could occur could have occurred that could dictate trend changes in offerings. So somebody loses a job, that's a time for pastoral care. That's a loss. People go through grief when they lose a job. And so while it's not the foremost thing you want to track by individuals, and some people are very sensitive about not wanting to see offering information, being able to see some trends is always important. Privacy of giving always needs to be discussed, and different churches have different practices for this. I've heard everything from pastors not having any clue what the total offerings are other than what's provided on the income statement, to pastors being able to see down to the individual gifts. Now, I'm not here to dictate one way or the other. Your church probably has a culture that dictates that based on history and what the pastor has or has not seen, or what the elders have or have not seen. That's obviously up to the church, but it's important to have that data, for somebody to have that data that can help trigger those things. Now, what's great about this is that you can, again, utilize volunteers to provide this information, but you can provide the permission so that they don't necessarily see who's giving what. So you can enter by name, by number, or by both. And the last thing I'll mention here that influences those offering trend changes is something like e-giving. We offer e-giving integration with Give Plus from Vanco Payment Solutions. It's a fantastic tool. It allows you to see these giving trends without the work of going and entering them in manually, although it could skew some of those numbers, because if giving's consistent, even though worship attendance is not, that's the benefit of e-giving, that it's consistent giving. It doesn't point to those trends at home. And so that's why that combination of attendance and offerings is key. All right, I know I've presented a lot on this first topic in this introduction. I'm noticing my time already half an hour in. These next 4 steps I'll build after that, but I probably will go over that 45 minutes. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat at any time, and I'll make sure to get to them. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going with the presentation. All right, so the next step number 2, is identifying those inactive members. Now, that's what's so great about having a tool like church management software, is that you can use this data to then get your list of inactives based on the criteria that you put in place. So we utilize a thing in Church360 called Smart Groups, which allows you to create these dynamic groups based on information in the system. Now, in this scenario here, as you're talking about inactive members, you may want to look at it by certainly people who are living, who are members, maybe who are greater than 18, because those who are under 18, their worship attendance, their inactivity is usually based on their parents' activity or inactivity, depending on what they're doing. And then you start looking at what's normal for my church. Are we, is it common that people attend, only 2 out of 4 Sundays, or is that the time to be concerned? Is it that there's certain people that we want to flag that when they fall off of attendance for a week or 2, they all of a sudden require pastoral care because they're so consistent? And really, there's some people that as long as we see them once a month, we know we're good. That will vary depending on the congregation. And so having the opportunity to define that is key. And so that's where we bring in smart groups or dynamic groups so that you can track information that changes. So through the combination of dynamic groups and tags, which as I showed before, you can track just about anything with tags, and custom fields where you can consistently find that information. So it may be that we want to track anybody who is an inactive member that we've identified as inactive in the custom fields, but who has attended worship in the last month or 2 months, and say maybe they're no longer an inactive member, and vice versa. People who are, an active member, a leading member, somebody who leads organizations but have stopped attending worship. You can use this combination of information to identify these different groups. And it's certainly not as simple as saying, all right, there's my inactive group, there's my active group, I'm going to go minister to them. It's not black and white like that. And so having that flexibility is key. So relationships are another part of that. If you see that there's inactive members, you could always find the list of people who are family members of those inactives or spouses of inactive members, and reach out and connect with them. Historical data is key as well. You can use that combination of people who used to attend or who have attended, X amount in this year, but not this amount in this year, and use that comparison to provide those groupings. And that way, if you're looking to react, you're not all of a sudden reacting to these inactive people who have been inactive for 5 years. All right. The other thing this is used for, and as we get into the later steps of following up, but you can create smart groups based off of geographical data. So you could say anybody who's in this zip code or within this many miles of this location, I'm going to reach out to them because maybe you're physically there. Maybe you're in a more rural setting where nobody is within a 15-minute drive. And so when you are taking a long car ride to visit somebody in the hospital, you may want to look around at those people in that radius to say, while I'm out here, is there anywhere I can stop by and connect with? So those are the different types of groups. I mentioned smart groups before as dynamic groups. That's being a key part of that. Then from there, you can build reports. And that's the thing I like about having these different smart groups is that I can look at the same report and change my groupings based on different criteria. And so there's another tool in there called Trends that allows me to compare different groups based on understanding what is the norm. If everybody kind of dips in the summer, well, if my inactive members dip in the summer as well, maybe they're not more inactive, it just follows the trends of the congregation. But from a reporting standpoint, you can easily generate reports based on people, information, attendance, and offerings. And then what's nice is that you can grant access to these reports to other people. And that's going to get into these steps as we share information. And then you can also prevent printing reports by sharing the access to this electronically. What I really like about that is not so much that it's less work on the church office, although that's a key part of it, but it's always up to date. Before we had Church360, my congregation had an older system. They didn't keep it updated because it was free when you don't upgrade, but you get what you pay for. And so we would only get, as elders, an updated attendance list once a quarter if we asked for it. It was no more frequent than that. And often the data would be several weeks old. And so you'd go through, and we didn't have the trend data, just a last attended date. And you'd say, okay, well, their last attended date was April 1st. Did they come because of Easter and hadn't attended any time before that? You don't know that without the context. And if it's late and it's not frequent, you can't make decisions off of that, or at least you can't make good decisions off of that. And so providing access to this data is key. And that's really where we're headed next, is share the list with the right people. So you want to make sure that those who are assisting or leading this part of the ministry have the access to the right information. So one way we do that is through the people view and creating different reports based on that. So the people view is a collection of all this information. You can pick and choose what columns go into that. And it's real easy. I'll take a look at that in just a moment and show you. So we have what are called data columns, which allow you to put all the right information in there that you want to see, no more, no less. You can then search or filter down or group based on different things. Then once you get down to that right list, that's where you say, okay, how do I want to share it? I can share it by providing mailing labels to the elder and say, okay, here is the list of 20 people who would like you to follow up with a greeting card, and just say, hey, we've missed seeing you at worship. And so you can do that. You can do what we call our church directory view, which allows you to export all of this contact information in a very nice formatted view and pass it off to somebody. You can also look at it in a variety of groupings, like households or marriages or givers. Givers is similar to marriages, except it tells you a different perspective on, if the person is giving jointly or individually. So you can take all of that information and then export it or save those views. So let me jump over here. We'll go back to people. So maybe, let's see, do I have my inactive group set up? I have an inactive tag here. So here's my list, 34 people who are inactive. And maybe all I want to do is show their contact information. So I'll say, all right, show me their address, their email address, their phone numbers, and if they have a photo, put it in there. Now I can save this view and say inactive contact list. And I can give people access to that. I could print this view and it'll print real nicely. And if that's the way to go, if you don't want to give everybody access electronically, you can do that. We'll switch it to the landscape so I get the phone numbers, and I can print that and share it. Oops. I can also download, like I said before, the directory or the mailing labels. I have all these different ways of, first off, getting to the list, like we talked about in step 2, and now sharing it with the right people. But I want to present another alternative to this, and we'll talk about permissions in a little bit. But one way that we just introduced is through a mobile app. And that is, there we go, mobile app people view. So you can now access on Android, oops, that should say, or iOS, pardon me for that, Android or iOS, all the core data within the app, the name, the address, the email, the phone. You can set up your lists and allow your ministry team, whether that's elders or your church staff, to access this from their phones. And they can still do all the typical things like search or smart groups or the like, but it allows you to then go in and see all that same information from on the road. So you can see their household, their family, their notes, but you can then quickly call or email right from where you were going to do it anyway. So rather than typing in the phone number, you just click the phone number and call. It makes it really easy to add pastoral visits and notes, which we're going to look at in just a moment. So those are some of the things that you might want to do. Oh, I mentioned directory before. I should have pulled this up. Let me show you what that looks like. There we go. That's what I mean by a church directory. It's a formatted approach where you can get the right information out, photos, names, contact information, and print it in a very nice format. I don't think this is going to replace your church photo directory, but for directories like this, like here is your elder territory, here are the people within your district. That's where directories really come into play. And it's for those who are not comfortable accessing it. So a number of different ways to get the right information to the right people, whether that's digitally or printed in a paper format. All right, the next step, step number 4. So we've tracked our data to get the information needed, to then number 2, identify the right people to reach out to then 3, share that list of people with the people who will be reaching them. Now it's time to start doing that. It's time to start your follow-up actions. And that's step number 4. So one way that you do this is through simple communication, phone calls or emails. And it's important to track that. So we have what's called notes, and then there's also another thing called pastoral visits, and you can do those separately or you can do those together. And you'll see here on the screen, and I zoomed in, this is probably the best view we've got of this, where you can track the date and who conducted this visit, and we call it pastoral visits in that broad sense of pastoral care, but it doesn't have to be just the pastor. You can indicate what type of visit it is, so like here, this one is marked as a home visit. We call call it marking the visit because we wanted to use a different word than tags, because tags refer to people information, but really it's like tags for visits. So you could say it's a home visit, it's a shut-in visit, it's a communion visit. You can do a combination, a communion visit at the home of a shut-in, any kind of combination you have. But then you can put notes in there. And that's where you can start putting in the information that others can see. And you can limit it by who should be able to see that. So you think about having all of this information in one place. We talked about that in step 1, getting all the relevant information about a person's attendance and offerings and contact. You combine that with the relevant information about their spiritual life that only people who are having those conversations and those relationships can have, and you put it in one spot, and that creates a great recipe for better pastoral care, better ministry to these people who definitely need to be ministered to. And so that's what that is. And I mentioned before, and I mentioned that briefly, but you can put that all in through the use of your phone. So who visited? If there are multiple people, if pastor and the elder went, you can track that. You can mark their specific visit types, add their notes with specific permissions. And I mentioned this before, but I think it's important to mention it again. Household profiles allow you to do the same thing for all the people at the address. So in this case, you've got the Barnes family. The contact details as well as the notes and visits flow down from household to everybody. So if you're visiting multiple people at once in that same location, you only have to enter this information once. So that's a key part, is tracking that. But your church management software should also provide an opportunity to do some of this follow-up. So we talked about before how you could just click on your phone to call or to email the person. There's also the ability to bulk email. Now, you'll have to be careful here. I don't recommend doing bulk email for ministering to inactives on every instance, but there's some things that you may want to do, some of these lightweight interactions, which allow you to send emails in bulk from your standard email client. People don't see that they're getting it in bulk. They see it's coming from you. And so when you think about upcoming worship services, like maybe you are having your Easter or Christmas service or a special anniversary service, or it's just rally day at Sunday school, to personally invite somebody to that and to do it quickly and efficiently, it makes a very nice additional touch. Now, this should not be your primary means of reaching out to inactives. Certainly individual phone calls or visits or emails are best for that, where you can really contextualize it. But if you want to just stay in touch by doing some kind of communication, I recommend doing bulk emails. And because the information's in your church management software, it's not too hard to do. So you can choose those recipients from smart groups or tags. So maybe you want to say something like, all of those inactive members who have kids between the ages of 4 and 12, I'm going to email them and invite them to bring their kids to Sunday school. And you could do that in a standard bulk email template where it's everybody come and attend Sunday school. Or you could do it individually and say, hey, I was thinking this might be good for you and your family to join us for Sunday school. Here are the details, something like that. It's a great way of doing it. If you're a little bit more on the traditional route, you could print out mailing labels. We talked about that before. It's a great way to send letters to individuals or households. If you're doing birthday cards or anniversary cards, it makes it really easy to do that. It's ideal for inviting people, again, to a holiday service or maybe a fellowship event, but to do so with a personalized invitation in the mail. So that's another way. And again, you can choose your recipients from smart groups or tags, and you maybe the tag is mailing label versus email, and you're sending the same group or the two different groups the same information in two different ways. All right, another way of doing this, of keeping track of your follow-ups, is through the events view, which we call events because there's different calendars that can go on it. And one of those different calendars is the pastoral visits calendar. And that allows you to see any upcoming pastoral visits. So of course it includes standard events like worship and education. You tie your attendance and your offerings to those events. But it also provides special events like anniversaries or, like I mentioned, pastoral visits. And so you could put together your own custom view that shows all of the birthdays and the anniversaries, the baptism birthdays, and the pastoral visits. And that almost acts as your to-do list and say, okay, today I have 2 birthday calls and a pastoral visit to do, and see that there. It's really a powerful tool to put all of these different kind of events, whether they be physical events or memorial events, remembrances of a specific thing that happened in the past. And again, you can view any combination of those calendars. All right. Oh, and last thing, view by month or by week, and you can export it to Word. So if you want to share this with somebody else and say, okay, here are all of the upcoming anniversaries in your district, here you go, print it out and share. Now, this is also available on mobile. And so as your team is getting used to the mobile device for people, they can still access this information from their phone too. So you can view all the events, you can view them by month, or in this case, day. We don't have a week view on mobile because there's no need to if you have the day view. And then you can click on any one of those links to access the profile, access their phone number, access their email address. And again, view all scheduled pastoral visits. Now we have another tool within Church360 called what we call mobile import. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. It allows you to sync your Church360 contacts with your mobile device using a thing called CardDAV, which is this technical term that basically describes syncing your contacts in Church360 Members with your phone contacts. And a one-way sync so that you always have the most up-to-date information. And we'll get into the fees and stuff in a second. But what this allows you to do is leverage your phone's tool, like reminders for birthdays, or searching for a person to call them, or tracking the contact information from a caller ID feature, all within your phone. And I really like this because it has some of these built-in reminders and things that I can see and get access to without setting those up myself. And it's really nice. Now for iOS and Windows, these are both, it's a free thing. For Android doesn't have this natively, so you have to download an app, and there's free apps and there are paid apps. The kind of information you get is really fantastic. And like any contact, you expect name and email address and phone number, but then it also brings over the birthdays and certain anniversaries like baptism, confirmation, weddings, pulls over their profile photo, their family information, and it also brings over notes, which is really fantastic. So before we had the mobile app for Church360, I'd have to log in on the browser view, which isn't too bad, but I found myself relying on the contacts tab more frequently than that because it's all right there, and it's what I'm used to seeing already. So that's about enough for CardDAV. I could talk about this in much more detail. In fact, we just had a blog post about it last week. You can access more information at 360members.com/CardDAV. All right, the last one, which is keep others informed. And I'll go back to my guide here. I had share the list and start follow-up actions. And then this last one I called track completed activities. We kind of combined that into step 4. With step 5 here, which is keep others informed, it's keeping them informed because of the tracked activities. So I wanted to clarify that because I should have kept that consistent. I knew that I wanted to dig into more detail on this in the webinar than what I put in the handout. So keeping others informed, it's about constantly finding that right dynamic smart group of people based on the follow-ups that have occurred. So you can make it almost like your to-do list and say, okay, here's all my criteria for what makes a member inactive. And now I'm going to make another group that keeps that criteria, but also adds on the criteria about follow-ups. So it says anybody who's inactive and has not received a pastoral visit in the last 2 weeks. That is my to-do list. These are the people I need to reach out. And then when I reach out, I add my visit and they fall off that list because while they still may be inactive, the follow-up has occurred. So that's a key part of it. And like I said, you can also put notes in there. But the reason you put the notes partly is for yourself, so you remember what you've done, but mostly is for other people, so that you have that historical record keeping, so that they can see it based on their permissions, seeing sensitive information or information that's not so sensitive, and then have that long history of that, so you can go back and see it. And so if somebody was inactive for a little while, there's a lot of care, they brought back into the church and they fell off again, you can go back and see, well, what brought them back last time, or what information here could have caused them to go away. So it's really key to keep others informed because it's not always going to be about you. And again, pastoral visits with appropriate types and permission-based notes. So this is where you can say, all right, I need to do my communion follow-up list. Who is everybody who is an inactive but eligible for communion person that has not communed in the last 2-3 weeks, and find that list and start reaching out to them. So it's really dynamic. Like I mentioned before, roles are a key part of this. And so whatever your church management software is, you want to set up the permissions so that people only get the access that they need. And in Church360, we have a very elegant solution for that. You can really get finely grained permissions with specific permission roles. You can give access to the users, but only the access that they need. And you can assign multiple roles to the user. So like in my case, I'm on Board of Elders, but I'm also on Church Council, which requires different levels of access. I can have both. And anytime somebody puts a note for Board of Elders, I still see it, even though I have the Church Council access to. And all of these permissions apply to mobile too. So that's just kind of our standard throughout this. Well, we are at 5 till. I've got a few questions in there. And I went through all of that information rather quick. So like I said, there's a lot of information there. I'd love to hear your questions. Let me give you a few details before we dig in. If you are not currently using Church360 Members, you can start your free trial at 360members.com. I'm going to put my contact information on the screen one more time. If you are watching this recording, go ahead, hit pause, because I'm going to move off to question and answers next. But that's the best way to reach me. So let's talk about questions and provide some answers to that. So the first question that I have in the hopper is an easy one. It's, can you use events for youth group attendance or weekend trips, etc.? Absolutely. And let me go into attendance and show you. So under the events view, you can create any number of events, but also any number of calendars. And so when I go here, we'll just create a new one for next Wednesday. I can add, youth Bible study, and I can add it to multiple calendars. There's youth, and let's say education. Then I can just go and mark attendance taken, and I can also say communion served or offerings taken. It's incredibly flexible, and that's where it comes in, that attendance should not just be about worship attendance. It should be about Bible study. It should be about youth group. You can track attendance at any kind of event that is a physical event. You can't really track attendance at anniversaries because there's nothing to track, unless it's an anniversary party, which you can put in there too. But yeah, use it for whatever kind of attendance you want to track, and then you can use that as part of your smart groups. So Josiah, hopefully that answers your question. Another question that I commonly get that I want to show over here on people is, what if I want to create a one-off smart group? Do you have to save smart groups for every single instance? And in many cases you can. But what if I want to say, all right, so here's my inactives. It's a tag right now. Let me switch it back to everyone. And I want to do anybody who is living, who is a member, who has not attended worship in the last 30 days. And I just happen to be going out for a hospital visit, and I just want to see whose address is within 5 miles of this hospital. And you can go and find that hospital, and it'll show you the list of members. I'm not going to save that because I don't go out to that hospital all the time, but you can quickly do that and it'll pull up your list. And you can still have all those other tools where you can export the mailing labels or send them an email. Just say, hey, I'm going to be in your area. Can I stop by? Something like that. So that's another fantastic tool. All right, well, we are just about out of time. I think I've run through the questions. I know there's probably going to be more after the fact, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for being here today and following this presentation with the 5 different steps. There's a lot of information here that I hope you can take back and say, we should be using our church management software more. Or maybe if you don't have church management software and you're relying on things like spreadsheets, you can say, maybe we should investigate getting a software. These principles are more important than the product themselves. It's more important that you are doing these actions and reaching out to these people who have fallen away from the church than what software you use. And so that's why I wanted to share it today. We have a tool that provides everything you need to accomplish these tasks, but we're not the only tool. And so if you already have something, please start doing this today, regardless of what you use, because it's so important for your congregation and for your individual members, and most importantly for the kingdom of God, because we need to be reminded of that salvation that the Lord provides, that forgiveness of sins. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's just that reminder that, hey, you are a part of this body of Christ. Come back and join us here. So that's my final message for you today. I'll put my contact information up one more time on the screen as we're about to sign off. But I thank you for joining me. Thanks for taking time out of your day. Keep an eye out for the emails with the follow-up to the recording and the link to the download. Thanks very much. Have a great day.